Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with fabulous concert programs. What are we on? 97. Oh, my goodness. It's been a while since we've done these. I took a little break to do a few other things, like the If I Could Choose Only One series and whatnot. But, we're at number 97. I got to get to 100 at least, right? And maybe we'll do even more. This next batch, up to number 100, is devoted to American Neo-Classicists. Now, what is an American Neo-Classicist? Well, like everything in music, it's a messy definition. Essentially, we're talking about the huge number of starting, early to mid 20th century composers who remained true to the traditional tonal, more or less, foundations of classical music up to that point, and who wrote in established or traditional forms, overtures, symphonic poems, symphonies, things like that, concertos. And I put together some programs that'll throw some of those names out there, because there is no place where they are more neglected or ignored than in America, the United States thereof. It's just terrible, because some of these were marvelous composers. They're wonderful composers. The irony is that they wrote because they wrote in traditional forms, and they all were of a certain conservative formal bent. Many of their works, major works, are short. Their symphonies are 25 minutes to half an hour, as long as a classical symphony. That doesn't cut it with today's concert programs, as often as not, because it's too short. People go to hear a big concerto or like a Bruckner or Mahler symphony, something that's 45 minutes to an hour long, and the programs are easy to put together that way, because you don't have to think. You do like an overture, you do a concerto, then there's the symphony on the second half, and you go home, and that's the whole deal. And so they don't get played, and they don't get played because they're neither here nor there. They're not like avant-garde crazy. They're not minimalist. They don't have a cult following, and they're not traditional enough, because they're still too dissonant for the traditionalists and not modern enough for the modernists. I don't know. They fall in between the cracks, but they're wonderful, and there's lots of them, and they wrote tons of music. And the reason it's so wonderful is because, as I've said a million times, the golden age of the symphony orchestra was the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Why? Because that's the period where we had orchestras. Real, large, multifarious, fully funded municipal symphony orchestras. And so, naturally, given the fact that these organizations existed, people wrote music for them. That's what happened. So, let's do the first program. Ready? Here we go. First half, Peter Mennin, Moby Dick, subtitled Concertato for Orchestra, a concerto for orchestra, essentially. It's about, 17 minutes long, roughly, 15 minutes, somewhere in there. It's a delightful piece of music. It's not based on any specific episode in Moby Dick, but rather on the impression that the book as a whole made on the composer. So, Mennin wrote almost purely in abstract forms. There's no program music in his output. He was a very, very fine composer. He was also the director of Juilliard. And one of you people snarkily said he was one of those composers who we could do without and we'd never miss. I don't know if that's true. I knew his daughter. She's an attorney in Manhattan. She did some work for one of the companies I worked for. But he was a guided missile of musical precision and accuracy, and wonderful, buoyant counterpoint, and he's just terrific. So Moby Dick is the first thing on the program. It's like an overture. It's like Leonora No. 3. It's a wonderful concert opener. Next, Piston Violin Concerto No. 1. Piston's first violin concerto, I'm going to go out on a limb, is as beautiful and effective a violin concerto as anyone in the 20th century wrote. It's right up there. It should be played as much as like Walton's or Barber's or any of those 20th century things that get trotted out quite regularly, and rightly so, don't get me wrong. It's splendid. It's tuneful. It's beautifully written for the instrument. There's not a note too long. Most of these composers were lean composers. You know, they weren't prolix. They didn't just dribble on like I do, for example, quite often. So then we have intermission, and everyone's feeling great and fulfilled, and they thought, wow, isn't that fabulous music? Why haven't we heard it before? We come back, and we do Harold Shapero's Symphony for Classical Orchestra. Now, Harold Shapero, who I also had the pleasure of knowing and who passed away a couple of years ago, was a Stravinsky worshiper. His music is patently similar in many ways to Stravinsky stylistically. He was always that way. He was a jolly guy. He stopped composing like decades ago because he couldn't secure accurate performances of his music. And the Symphony for Classical Orchestra was composed like in the 40s, somewhere around there. There are two recordings, one with Leonard Bernstein in mono with the Columbia Symphony. It's very, very good. And the other was Andre Previn in the LA Phil. And I saw those performances. I actually saw this thing live. It's a wonderful work. It's based absolutely clearly on Beethoven's Fifth and Seventh Symphonies as seen through the eyes of Stravinsky. And it is so much fun to listen to. It is a little bit prolix. The slow movement is rather long. And Shapero was very funny about it when he talked about it. He said, I couldn't stop. I know it's too long, but he loved it. And it's a lovable work. It's scored for exactly the same orchestra as Beethoven's Fifth, with an extra piccolo, a contrabassoon, trombones, and it will absolutely delight you. It made a wonderful impression live in concert, and a quizzical impression. People were scratching their head going, where have we heard that before? Oh, that resembles, it sounds so much like something, but it's not. But it's a work of genius, a brilliant, brilliant, wonderful work that deserves to get played. And that is the second half, because it's about 40 minutes long. It's a symphony long. It's a second half length all by itself. And, it makes a very satisfying impression, I think, anyway. So that, my friends, is a fabulous concert program that you will never see live, but which you can enjoy in the comfort and privacy of your own listening room. And I respectfully urge that you do just that. So keep on listening. Take care.